Thank you, Uncle George. Okay. No, I appreciate that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is one of our favorite speakers. We always look forward to that, and I don't say that lightly. I mean that sincerely. He is one of America's most important, influential, and respected voices on cultural, political, and education issues. He's an award-winning professor in academia, having taught at Boston University, University of Texas, and Harvard. He's a three-time confirmed executive in the Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush administrations, and he's the author of more than 24 books, including 2 New York Times #1 bestsellers. He is the host of the #7 ranked nationally syndicated radio show, Morning in America. And joining him on stage is best-selling author John Cribb, as together they come to talk about their latest collaboration on America the Strong, conservative ideas to spark a new generation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Cribb and Bill Bennett.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Still morning. Yep, great. Good morning, Mrs. Bennett. Good morning. You should start the day by saying good morning, not Mrs. Bennett, but good morning to your wife, and say, good morning. You're right. I'm wrong. I'm sorry. Whatever it was. And she's applauding. It'll cover you. Excuse me for being just in mood and disposition a little happier than Mark. As I always say to Mark, it's easy to be happier than Mark. But that's, he is so right about so many things. It's just my disposition is different. I go along with Isaiah, a theoretical pessimism. It's all wind and ashes at the end. Everything that man has created, sub specie aeternitas, it will be indeed. But that's theoretical pessimism. Operationally, optimism. What can we do today? What can we do here? What can we do tomorrow to move the ball along? Right. They asked me the most important thing I learned in Washington after my 3 jobs, with 2 with Ronald Reagan, 1 with George Bush. I said the first thing I learned is how much I dislike salmon. I said that the second thing, probably good for me, I know. The second thing I learned is what I learned from my football coach. You are either on offense or you are on defense. And if you're not on offense, you're on defense. And on this, I agree with Mark 100%. Let's go on offense. Now, operational optimism. Also optimistic because of what we did on Tuesday and Wednesday, John Cribb and I. We were at Liberty University, one of our sponsors, and we addressed 13,000 young people at their assembly. And you talk about a cause for optimism. That is a cause for optimism. In addition to that, I said, who are your most distinguished graduates? And this young man said, without hesitation, Samantha Ponder from College Football Game Day and Shannon Bream from Fox News. I said, I like that. That's a good combination. We also met the son of one of the Duck Dynasty guys who's enrolled there at Liberty. So it was a great and encouraging visit, and John will have more to say about that. We want to talk to you on a very practical level today about our book, America the Strong. This is a practical exercise that we hope you might take up. John Cribb, by the way, he and I have worked on other books. You may be familiar with the American Patriots Almanac. You may be familiar with a book called The Educated Child. And if not, maybe you will be familiar with a book we collaborated on together 20 years ago called The Book of Virtues. And so we've been working together for a long time, and it's been a great time. This is a practical book. This is to go back to first principles, because we need to go back to first principles about what it means to be a conservative. Listening to the debates, it's clear we need to remind ourselves what conservative principles are. And as we are facing the challenge of not only barbarism and state socialism, and also the challenge of liberalism, which to the chairman of the Democrat National Committee, she finds hard to distinguish between socialism and the Democratic Party and liberalism. Fair enough. It's important to know who we are and what it is that we believe. Now, in the book, we point out that it's an interesting irony that we seem to be on defense so often. Again, back to Mark's interview. but 40% of Americans self-identify as conservative. Think about that. 25% of Americans self-identify as liberal. But conservatives always seem to be on defense in so-called polite company, on TV and in the movies, oftentimes the radio, cocktail parties, gatherings, and so on. This is because of the dominance of the liberal elite, as you know, in the universities, in the foundation world, in Hollywood, and elsewhere. So conservatives need to defend their ideas. What John and I did in this book was to take the questions as we heard them. He'll tell you the genesis of the book. But to take the questions as they are uttered, as they are said by liberals that we've all been asked, we've all been challenged, and answer them as best we could. This is a book to help guide the next generation. The subtitle is Conservative Ideas to Spark the Next Generation on a whole range of issues. Everything from abortion to gay marriage, to, we take all the hard ones, to environmental issues, global warming, free enterprise. Global warming, free enterprise. You will not get the first copy of the book. First copy of the book went to the head of my church, the Holy Father, the Pope. Thought he ought to bone up a little bit on free enterprise. I have close Catholic friends who worry about me every time I do that. They're worried about some stroke of lightning coming down, but it's okay. He's a man. He's a man, and he can get it wrong, and it's okay. Anyway, the book is divided into five large sections, and then individual sections under that. The 5 large sections are described by an acronym, and the acronym is FLINT. This was given to us by one of our listeners to Morning in America, who called in and said, you can sum up the whole conservative enterprise by the acronym FLINT. And we don't know who this guy is, because I'd sure send him a free copy, because he never called back, but we took the idea and ran with it. FLINT, free enterprise. F, free enterprise. L, limited government. I, individual liberty. N, national defense. T, traditional values. And that, right. And think of those flintlock rifles, and think of flint and a spark. Yep, yes, sir. Are you carrying one? That's the only thing that makes me nervous. Okay, all right, fine. All right, you're in Washington, you can't have a flintlock rifle. Right, isn't that funny? You're in a town named Washington, and you can't have a flintlock rifle. Think about that for a minute. Anyway, that's how the book is described. Let me just say another word or two. I'll come back in a minute or a few minutes. I want to let John get up here and tell you about the genesis of the book, what we learned at Liberty. That was of particular interest, and a few other thoughts. But if you have a son or daughter, grandson, granddaughter, niece, nephew, they're going off to college, they're going out into the world, they're going to run into these arguments, and you want to equip them, intellectual armor, for the arguments they'll hear, and what the best answers that we could come up with, and we consulted a lot of our friends. That's what America the Strong is all about. So it's a very practical venture this morning. That's why we did this book. That's why we put it together. And we would appreciate your attention. We'll be at the book signing as well. Let me introduce my co-author and my good friend, my colleague from Spartanburg, South Carolina, John Thomas Eli Cribb.
Thank you. Thanks. It is a real privilege to be here, and I loved writing this book with Bill, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here. He said to tell you about the genesis of the book real quick. The idea was born on a drive to school with my 2 daughters, and we usually have this guy's show. You know, this is the problem following Bill. He's up here and I'm down here. We were driving to school, and we usually have Bill's show on the morning, his radio show, and my older daughter, who's in high school now, she started asking questions like, well, what exactly is a conservative, and what do they believe, and what's wrong with big government? Why can't rich people pay all the taxes? And I quickly discovered that explaining those things to a young person in a way that will satisfy them and answer their questions, it's not that easy to do off the top of your head. So I started talking to Bill about it, and this book was born. But yeah, we went to Liberty University on Wednesday. It was my first time there. It is a fabulous place, beautiful campus, great students, and they have this really neat tradition called convocation. Is that what they call it? Yeah. 3 times a week, all the students on campus. It's 13,000 students. They gather in one place, and they listen to a visiting speaker. And about 10 days before we were there, Senator Bernie Sanders had been there and had delivered, Bernie Sanders' left-wing message. So we thought we would respond to the senator while we were there and give the students another point of view. So I'm just going to real quickly tell you two or three things he told the students and how he responded, and then I'll give the microphone back to Bill. He said, this is to quote a senator, he told these students that, quote, "It would be hard to make the case that we are a just society or anything resembling a just society today." And we told the students we flat out disagreed with that assessment of our country. We have a section in our book up front called The American Record, where we point out, among other things, that this country has ensured freedom for more people than any other nation in history. And that since its founding has been a world leader in establishing rights for people, that we have a section called Free Enterprise, and in that we explain that despite its drawbacks, it is hands down the best system the world has ever known for lifting people out of poverty and helping them prosper, and this country has done that for millions and millions of people, and we simply do not agree with Senator Sanders' portrait of this country as an unjust and unfair place. The senator told those students that this is a country, to quote him again, that worships not love of brothers and sisters, not love of the poor and the sick, but worships the acquisition of money and great wealth. And we told the students, no, we do not think that most Americans worship great wealth. We do think most Americans care for their brothers and sisters and their fellow Americans. That yes, in a prosperous nation like this, all of us at times struggle with materialism, but that's not something a big government program from Washington is going to fix for us. We think the Bible and traditional values are much better tools for dealing with that, and we have a section in our book called Traditional Values, and we explain exactly what that term means and why they are important. And finally, the senator, he told those students, to quote him again, "This is a nation which in many ways was created, I'm sorry to have to say this, from way back on racist principles. That's a fact." And we told the students, no, that as Abraham Lincoln explained to Stephen Douglas in their famous debates in 1858, the founders set those principles down so that eventually everybody could have them, and in fact, those principles have enabled this country to make such great progress against racism and establish equal rights for all. And we explained that, these days some people look at this nation's founding and they see something, though imperfect, something glorious with great and shining principles attached. And some people these days look at our founding and they view it mainly through the prism of oppression and racism and classism and greed. And we conservatives stand for the former view, that we stand with Abraham Lincoln. So we told the students these things, and afterwards several of them, not just 3 or 4, lots of students came up and said, thank you, we needed and wanted to hear a rebuttal. And several of the faculty members came up to us afterwards and said thank you. We really wanted our students to hear that counterpunch. They needed to hear it. So even in a place like Liberty, which is a fabulous institution and definitely more conservative than most colleges in this country, even in a place like Liberty, young people need to hear conservative values articulated and explained. And that's what our book is about. It's about handing conservatism on to the next generation. In a lot of ways, really, the heart of conservatism is the idea that each generation has the responsibility to pass along our finest ideals and principles and values to the next generation. If we don't do that, when we do that, we maintain civilization and it can go forward. When we don't do that, civilization gets in trouble. And conservatism is the same way. If we conservatives don't articulate and explain and teach conservative principles to young people, they're not going to know about them and they're not going to embrace them. And we can't then be surprised when they get carried off by liberal ideology. So that's what this book is about. It's part of the project and process of handing conservatism on forward to the next generation. And that was our trip to Liberty. And with that, I will hand the microphone back to my friend, Bill Bennett.
Lest this feel like a prolonged infomercial, we're going to stop soon. Gil will finish ahead of time and give it to the generals. I just want to pause over a couple of points John made, because it really was eye-opening to be at Liberty. Think about this. Think about how many universities in this country are unlike Liberty. First of all, Liberty invited Sanders. I've been invited and then uninvited by I don't know how many universities to speak because the faculty would vote down the invitation that the president would proffer. And this has happened to me any number of times. Good for liberty. They invited Sanders. He came and speak. They were polite to him. They were respectful toward him. He was decent to them. But they then needed to answer his questions. They then needed to counter that. And that's our point. These kids need to get these questions answered ahead of time. Think of those 13,000. That's a big crowd at Liberty. But now take a look at the crowds that are appearing for Bernie Sanders all over the country. They are huge crowds, and huge crowds of young people. Yeah, I agree with Mark. The man knows his own mind. He's consistent. He's not, a closet socialist. He's right out there in the open. But there are an awful lot of people who are buying it, who believe it. I can show you a poll I've referred to on my radio show any number of times that says, what system do you think is better, socialism or capitalism? And capitalism, the last time we did it for our millennials, capitalism won by 3 points, 49-46. Come on, that's dangerous, that's risky. So we have to go back and do the basic work. We have to go back and do that. When you're making a decision about your children, with them about where they're going to school or college, these are the kinds of things to think about. Mrs. Bennett and I, we were very fortunate. Our boys are both good students, scored well, and they were very good athletes. They both went to Princeton. And there was a little concern about, the politics at Princeton. There was a report in the Princeton newspaper about contributions for the 2008 campaign, and it was 98% for Obama. The 2% you wonder, was it the chemistry department? No, it was buildings and grounds personnel who gave to the Republican. Sorry. Nevertheless, you got to know your child. These two boys came through that university basically stronger in their conservative beliefs. It probably pays to have Mrs. Bennett as your mother. She thinks I'm a little soft time to time. Anyway, that's another thing. But our older son is a real conservative idea warrior, and our younger son became a different kind of warrior. On graduation from Princeton, he was one of 2 people who took the oath and became a United States Marine. So, but they will tell you if you talk to them, and this may be familiar to you with your kids, your grandkids, your nephews, your nieces. They'll say, these kids my age, they just say, well, I kind of like the Republican position on taxes. I think government's too big, but I just can't support a bigoted party. I just can't support a party that's so intolerant. I just can't support a party that doesn't, love all people. Well, there's an answer to that. There are a lot of answers to that. And that's why we wrote up this book, to give those answers to these young people. If they don't get it right, the country's not going to get it right. And these millennials need to have this kind of education. John started by saying, Sanders was talking about a just society. And there are a lot of ways to answer this question about America being a just society. Let me just close by reminding you my tenure, how it started for me in Washington. Ronald Reagan made me chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities and then Secretary of Education. And when I got the job, some of you have heard this before from me, Mrs. Bennett, who is herself a teacher, a former special ed teacher, said, why don't you go out and teach classes first? Why don't you go find out what you're talking about before you make your pronouncements? And I said, none of the other guys do. Why should I? And she said, because you're the Secretary of Education, do your homework. And I said, what do you want me to do? She said, go visit schools, go teach, show respect for teaching by teaching yourself, respect for teachers and students and their parents. Go into the classroom, teach the Federalist Papers, teach the Declaration of Independence. I said, Elaine, I am the Secretary of Education of the United States. I do not do retail, I do wholesale. And Mrs. Bennett said to me, her father's a very successful businessman, do good retail and you'll do better wholesale, big boy. And so I did. I think she regretted that advice a little bit, though. It was 140 schools, a lot of out-of-town visits. That's why we have 2 boys, not 7 boys, but that's the way it goes. And in any case, maybe we had some influence on those folks. But we're talking about a just society. There are a lot of arguments about America. We make them in the book. Free enterprise. Norman Borlaug, immigrant family from Minnesota. You know who he is. He was an expert on plants and how to grow plants, and how to grow plants even in tough circumstances like Minnesota. And what did he do? He invented techniques for plant growth which led, people estimate, to the saving of 1 billion lives. 1 billion lives. That's what the free enterprise system did in America. The free enterprise system, when we went to war and Roosevelt said we needed to get the armaments up for this country, called in American businessmen and said, I need your help. And that arsenal of democracy went to work. And the most important city in the country at that time, you may remember, was Detroit. What sad times have befallen that city. Because we rolled tanks and jeeps and equipment off the tracks at Detroit at a rate faster than anything the Germans could do or the Japanese could do. And they have a pretty fair reputation for efficiency, those two countries. But they were no match for American know-how and American enterprise, and that's why that cannot be choked. So those are some of the arguments, that we make in the book and that we've made around the country. But the reason I mentioned the visits to the schools is I'm reminded is because of one of the visits is in San Diego, and I talked to a junior, and she had a question, a young woman had a question, junior in high school, and she said, hearing you talk about America, you really do love this country, don't you? I said, sure I do. I said, I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My mother was married and divorced 5 times. She was Catholic, sort of. But she was a great, great woman. She just kept making the wrong choice over and over again. People do that about certain things. One hopes it's not about the most important decision one makes in life, or the 5 most important decisions you make in life. I said, of course, I grew up in Brooklyn. I was a scholarship student. My brother was a scholarship student. I said, my mother said, study hard, play sports, do everything you can to get into good colleges and work hard. I'm in the cabinet of the United States. I'm in the cabinet of the United States. Best thing Barack Obama ever said was on his election night. He said, in no other country could this have happened. In no other country. It's the best thing, maybe the last best thing, the last good thing he said in a long time. But I said, so I told her that, and I said, but there's something else here. There's something else. Maybe this explains my optimism about the country. I know some history, and I know what this country's capable of. It always looks as if we're just about to go under when something happens. Maybe that next awakening that our friend Ralph Reed is talking about is around the corner. I don't know, but I have a sense that something is happening. But I said, let me give you a last argument. I said, every country has gates. And I said, we raise the gates or we lower the gates. And when you raise the gates, which way do people go? Do they run in or do they run out? So we raise our gates and people run in. Heck, we don't raise our gates and people run in. They crawl over the gates. I said, and that's a pretty shorthand test for what kind of a country it is. We try to make the defense as articulate and clear and straightforward a way as we can. Because this book, like the other books John and I have worked on, or I've been honored to work with him, are all about our children and the education of our children. Because that's the future. They are the future. And that's why we're thinking of them when we do these books. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks so much.